Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Would that it were so simple as just like picking a policy and executing it. You know, we've had people say like, "Oh, just close the dang border." Like, okay, so there's a policy and you can try to execute it, and it sort of never happens. So you just keep saying it, and at least I'm saying the right words. And then you got folks on the other side who are like, well, no, just like let them in. And okay, we did that. And now what do we do? Well, just keep letting them in. Well, but why? And then there's, well, we have a moral obligation to do so. And that just opens up onto a whole new vista of strangeness. Or it's the practical argument. Well, we need people to do these jobs. We've got all these jobs and, we're not going to have economic growth unless we flood the zone with quote unquote newcomers. Well, that is an argument from the early 90s that is still being deployed. And you know what else is being deployed?
You mean the early 1890s?
Yeah. Yes, just about. What's also being deployed is technology that is capable of taking away everyone's job.
Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron and editor James Poulos. So it is with a sigh of weariness and exhaustion that I inform our listeners that the State of the Union occurred this week. As of this recording, it was, I guess, last night. And if you listen to any other political podcast besides this one, you will probably already have heard about it. If you only listen to this political podcast, you're not going to hear all that much about it because we sort of agreed off mic that the sole purpose of this spectacle at this point is tedium and distraction. And it doesn't seem to have delivered anything other than that. It doesn't seem to have defied expectations. Biden is now addressing, obviously, a divided Congress, which he was not doing before. He did get some heckling and pushback from that divided Congress, especially, I guess, first and foremost, the biggest kind of boo line was the claim that Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I believe this was a reference to a proposal that we should revisit and need affirmative approval of these entitlements, but that is not the mainline Republican position. And certainly Republicans are trying to tie a promise of less spending to the debt ceiling, but that's a far cry from taking away your entitlements. When I read this, I thought, I wish that there were kind of more serious attention being paid to the effect of mandatory spending on the budget. But alas, it is not so. There were a number of other kind of heckling lines, especially to do with the border and fentanyl. Biden mentioned the fentanyl crisis, and it was pointed out to him in real time that much of that is his fault, having to do with his administration's border policy, which we will get into talking about the border in a little bit. But by and large, Biden's attempting to sort of project confidence. Let's finish the job is his whole kind of shtick in this speech. There has been much chatter about, will we hear from him soon that he is going to run for a second term? It seems likely, although the numbers among Democrats about how many people want him to do so, to run again, are really abysmal. I think last time I checked, they were somewhere in the 30%, somewhere in the 30 percentage points that of Democrats who want him to run again. But as the Times recently detailed, vis-a-vis Kamala Harris, there aren't a lot of great other options, and there's a fair amount of infighting as well. So that's going to be basically everything we say directly about the State of the Union. We're going to give you our State of the Union, or at least we're going to turn our attention to the things that we find most pressing and interesting of late in the news. And the first thing we wanted to talk about is this testimony on the part of Twitter execs before the House. This is a function, obviously, of Republicans in the House having a little bit more leeway. And one of the first things they have done is that the House Oversight Committee has called a few former Twitter executives, including Deputy Counsel James Baker, to testify about the Hunter Biden laptop story. And there's a fair bit here that we can get into. I mean, our listeners will be familiar with this whole thing. In the lead up to the 2020 election, there was a really, to many people, shocking series of events that involved the reporting of this, the breaking of this story by the New York Post about Hunter Biden's laptop, his involvement with China and Ukraine, and whether Biden might be connected to that. This story was suppressed. The Post was blocked out of Twitter. The drill. And lately, this all has come back into the news because we still haven't really gotten a lot of good answers about it. And the Twitter files, the Elon Musk kind of bombshell revelations that he passed on to people like Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss, have revealed a fair bit of at least interaction between the FBI, the government, and these social media companies like Twitter. The Twitter testimony on this topic is that there were mistakes made. Mistakes were made. This was not the right way to handle this issue, but the government was not directly involved in telling Twitter to suppress this story. And here's one of those quotes from Baker. "I am aware of no unlawful collusion with or direction from any government agency or political campaign on how Twitter should have handled the Hunter Biden laptop situation." Even taking this at face value, it doesn't really, for me at least, answer the bigger question, which is, how tight is this relationship? Speaking generally, I mean, we know that companies like Facebook and Twitter were getting directives about so-called misinformation, potential Russian interference. It always seems to lead them in one direction. But when it comes to this specific testimony, let me ask you guys this first. Do you buy it?
Do we buy the testimony of the former Twitter executives?
Yep.
Well, no. I mean, they were just lying. I mean, they were just lying in this lawyerly way, or this lawyer directed way, just saying, "I don't recall."
Yeah.
I mean, from what I gather, that was their main thing, which, as long as you say, "I don't recall," then when, your own words are presented to you later, you have a shield, and you can't be indicted for perjury. I mean, it seems like the Twitter file stuff that Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss and Michael Schellenberger went through, it seems pretty clear that there's no question that they were constantly talking to the FBI. The FBI paid Twitter because the Twitter employees were doing so much work for the FBI that they had to cover the expenses. I mean, it was seriously like the marriage of the surveillance state with the surveillance apparatus. So I don't know. And I was glad that they did this. First thing, they had this hearing. I thought it was hilarious to hear AOC, who supposedly is this hardcore radical leftist, up there saying it was an egregious waste of the taxpayers' resources to be calling out a social media company when we could be doing so much other stuff. And when she said that the Hunter Biden laptop, that it's all half lies, just revealing what a hack she is. So no, I mean, they were all lying or obfuscating, and I mean, I don't know what good it's going to do, but I'm glad that they
Well, right.
did
I
it.
mean, that does lead to the question, right? Because I basically agree with you. I mean, he says, "I am aware of no unlawful collusion." That sort of talk always indicates it's just you're talking in a way that you at least can claim you weren't lying when it turns out that you are wrong. So that all seems right to me. And like you say, the Twitter files give us plenty of evidence of intimate relationship between the government and these platforms. So that does kind of raise the question, like, what is the usefulness of this sort of exercise? Like, is this even a route that House Republicans are well advised to take in dealing with this problem if you're just going to get kind of stuffed shirts talking their way out of it?
Yes, this is the media cycle. You try to prevent something that you don't want to come out from coming out. It comes out eventually. You expect that it's going to come out eventually. You have a plan in place. You sort of stonewall. I mean, this is just like crisis management as a form of governance. And Twitter files notwithstanding, hearings notwithstanding, there's like a lot of talking about what's going on and not a lot of doing anything about what's going on. It's anyone's guess like what the next step in the overhaul of Twitter or not is going to be, but it's just, we're allowed a small peek into a process in which the agency of American citizens plays no part. This is just not an area of the regime where people like you and me, in their capacity as citizens, get to participate in any meaningful way. That is because these technologies are weapons of state. They came out of military research and development, and they have military applications. And the U.S. is like trying to ban the export of certain pieces of high tech to China or wherever, on the basis that these are dual use technologies. Oh, if these fall into the wrong hands, they might use them for military purposes. And it's like, well, we are currently embroiled in a digital world war, and you can hook your phone up to a drone and kill people, and that's actually happening right now. And there's no daylight between the civilian and the military applications of these technologies, except insofar as, on the one hand, you can use it as entertainment. On the other hand, you can use it to perform acts of violence. But of course, even that distinction is sort of blurring away on the internet. The more that things get simulated, and the more people put their energies into the machine and not into their own real lives. So, it's not much to get very excited about. And ultimately, if things are going to change, the change is going to have to come at the level of trusting our Republican form of government and a willingness to allow Americans' constitutional rights to exist, to apply online as well as off, in spite of all the scary things that might happen as a result. People saying things that you don't want them to say, or hanging out with people you don't want them to hang out. I mean, these are fundamental components of the American political system and cultural and commercial system that supports it. And if they're not present on the internet, then it's only a matter of time before they're absent off the internet. And we've been seeing that play out. None of this should be terribly shocking, although it is obviously very unfortunate. But we're going to need leaders at the state level, if we can't get them quite yet at the federal level, willing and able to pass, whether it's an amendment or something a little bit lower down the chain. It's got to be not picking winners and losers. It's got to be laying out broad general principles, protecting and enumerating, if needed, Americans' core digital rights, deriving from the Constitution and from deeper sources still.
What deeper sources, James? There's no higher truth than the positive law. Anyway, that's a separate question. But do you, as you survey the landscape of Republican politicians, or even just like statesmen more generally, do you see anybody who's a promising candidate for grasping the nettle of this? Because the distance between what you just described, which is much more kind of pointed, incisive, sort of theoretically cogent, and the distance between that and whatever's going on in the House Oversight Committee seems quite large. And And I am wondering what your take is on like whence cometh the man who will recognize the needs that you are talking about.
Let's get that printed up and put on a t-shirt.
I mean, yeah,
surveying the landscape, I think that I would be least surprised to see rumblings in this direction coming out of the Mountain West, coming out of Arizona, coming out of Florida, Texas, Arkansas. I'm just I'm throwing out states where, whether at the state or the federal level, there's been a sign or two of life and awareness, understanding on the frontiers of tech, and tech that Americans can actually confidently use for the purposes of generating goods and services that strengthen us instead of weaken us. Those would be the states. There are some representatives of those states kicking around in Washington who I think are worth watching. We'll be tracking this as events unfold. But election year coming up, this is worth running on. Biden and Trump are gravitating towards sort of dueling digital bills of rights or whatever. It's very easy for these things to drift in the direction of like, well, here's my my talking points list of policies that I think are the right ones. And as tempting as that is, and we'll probably never live in a world where we're entirely free of public policy recommendations. But we need to go to the level of principle. We need to, make sure that this isn't just like, well, the feds are going to intervene in the intimate details of everyday life, but in a good way, not in a bad way. That is not the direction that we need to go in. Not just because it's bad governance, but it's not going to not going to create the conditions that we need for the people to organize and associate themselves in generative ways that cannot be ginned up by bureaucracies or bots or any other sort of artificial schema of organization, and really have to be animated by the spirit, by life force, not by offices and algorithms.
Well, we told you we were going to give you our state of the union, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. I mean, this is like, it is remarkable, not just that we're not seeing this in the House Oversight Committee, but that this whole parcel of issues like is nowhere to be found in the post-mortem of this of this State of the Union. The Biden laptop story, which has become kind of an emblem, a larger emblem for this parcel of issues, I think is well summed up, James, in what you said about like, here we get a little window, especially since the Musk era, whatever other kind of hiccups and road bumps there are along the way to that takeover. Like, we've gotten this little peek into a total cabal, like just a whole set of decisions being made about things that really affect us directly, affect our ability to communicate with one another, to access and disseminate information. I mean, this is a group of people that was reaching into your DMs. Like, never let it be forgotten that you couldn't message the story from person to person on Twitter. And yet, like, we don't get a say in any of this. So surely that is like, should be a big priority. We'll see if it develops into one in the lead up to 2024. I mean, obviously this is on a lot of Republicans' radar. I think it needs to be a lot more at a much more theoretical level. It needs to be kind of addressed in a sort of regime way. And we will see. We'll see if it does. Let us talk about China. I'm interested to know what you guys think about this Chinese spy balloon. I kind of started to become aware of it in the lead up to this past weekend. I think it was like a very memeable sort of news story, and that in some ways obscured the extent of the concern that we should probably feel about this. On Friday, the Pentagon announced that a Chinese spy balloon was hovering over Montana in an apparent attempt to persuade Anthony Blinken not to cancel a weekend trip he had planned to make to Beijing. Planning for the trip began after President Biden met with President Xi Jinping of China in Bali, Indonesia last November, and Mr. Blinken had been expected to hold talks with Mr. Xi. So this thing was spotted basically just kind of in the sky, like in very much in a sort of, hey, look at that big sort of, I don't know, UFO, unidentified flying object over there. And what the heck is it? And then it kind of came out that this was a spy balloon. The Pentagon knew about it. They'd been tracking it for some time. They had not shut it down. They finally did get it out of the sky. But the next thing that happened is the government sort of said, don't worry, this happens all the time. This is like a thing that China just sort of does. Like there's just spy balloons sort of in our airspace. I think it was our friend Lomez on Twitter who commented that this is the sort of thing that just out of pure sheer dumb, like vitalist energy, a confident country would shoot these sorts of things out of the sky immediately. Like, you almost want like, I mean, I'm not advocating this, so nobody tell me that I am, but you almost want citizens to like go grab a rifle and just sort of do target practice with it. It is not the sort of thing that you want to just be taken as a matter of course. And I suspect many people have been saying that this is kind of the point for China. I mean, it's not like it's not an invasion of Taiwan. It's not like some gesture of war directly, but it is, I think, a test to see how much of a backbone we have, how aggressive and vigorous we are. I mean, Biden, just for mentioning it in the State of the Union, got pushback from China that he was slandering them. And in general, the CPC has been really, not forthcoming. Nobody will be surprised to hear me say, look, guys, we have this war between Russia and Ukraine, where Russia is the invader, and everybody's like, talking about Russia. There were all sorts of people wearing blue and yellow ties at this event, including, I think, Mitch McConnell. I could be wrong about that. You'll have to check me, but it's just like the world's focus has been studiously pointed toward Russia, and meanwhile, China just seems to be kind of, I mean, I don't know. What do you think their game is? In a perfect world, what would we be doing about this? These are some questions that I have, which did not seem to be addressed at the State of the Union. What do you guys make of them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they should have shot the thing down. I mean, they knew it was coming. They knew where it was. And then they claimed, well, we can't shoot it down because there could be civilian casualties. But it's like over Montana. I mean, the whole
like
state
bison casualties.
Yeah, okay, bison, right. I mean, the
right.
state is like 98% like empty. It just seemed totally feckless and absurd. And the way that, reactive or reflexive Biden supporters or Trump haters or whatever acted as though the whole thing was, I don't know, like when they claimed people were outraged by Obama's beige suit, which, was also, they acted like this was like fake outrage at that level. Just like what are you talking? Like, I saw on Twitter, people were saying Republicans wouldn't want to shoot down the balloon because it's white. Like,
oh my gosh, this was, didn't Bill Kristol, am I getting that right? That Bill Kristol said something like, if the balloon were tweeting anti-Semitic slurs, that Republicans would be calling to celebrate it on Twitter or something?
Probably. This weird, I mean, everything has become so absurdly polarized now. So, well, if you want to shoot down the balloon, that must mean that you're a racist. So we're going to defend the balloon. And we're going to defend the right of the Chinese Weather Service to send their balloons over our territory and, do whatever it is that, I don't know. I mean, on the part of the Chinese, I think it was just like some kind of provocation, just like, okay, we're going to do this. I don't know. I mean, it's more depressing. Like it just, again, and I hate to get like black pilled for for our listeners, but I really keep hitting the sense that America is eating the seed corn, and that's where we're at. We're just kind of like halfway through the silo, and when we get to the bottom, we'll be like, what? So, yeah.
Yeah, good times. I mean, the balloons are everywhere. Like, it only took a week or so. Has it been a week? Like days? I don't even know. It's been not that long for the news to come out. Oh, right, the balloons. Yeah, they got them all over like Vietnam and Japan and Taiwan, and Chinese have been doing this for years. And now we get to find out about it. It's just another piece of managed information, and it's getting to the point where you literally look up in the sky and you're like, oh, there's another one that slipped through, and it'll just be massaged back into the narrative as so many other things are. The bigger picture here is how much of a threat to the well-being of the American people is the Chinese government,
compared to the American government.
Well, yes, if you want to take it in that direction, we can do that too. But even just in isolation, I mean, yeah, just kind of as a truism of geopolitics, you don't want the other guy to sort of like become this 800-pound gorilla that I mean, if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile, whatever. Insert your kind of, whether it's Sun Tzu or like your grandma, like everyone has a sort of commonsensical take about not letting the other guy get too big. But when you dig deeper than that, it's a little bit more complicated than the narrative makers want us to think. And when you introduce the fact that, like, yeah, if we're halfway through the seed corn, are we going to get to the bottom before like the first Chinese soldier like wades ashore in San Diego or whatever? Like, it's just the nature of war has changed. It'll continue to change. It does seem like, the Chinese are perfectly happy to let Americans just feed themselves into TikTok until there's just sort of a bloody stump left. But let's face it, like, TikTok isn't all horrible. Even if all the information goes to China, there's still normal people just sort of like posting memes or whatever. Like, it's not as easy as saying like, oh yes, China existential threat to America because they're feeding us candy that's bad for us, just like all the other candy that we eat every day. But this stuff is coming from China, so they're the global foe. Not entirely clear that there is a global foe that is enemy number one, and that even if there was, we would really have anything that we could do about it that would be sustainable and pencil out in a cost benefit analysis. I mean, you've got our allies with a special relationship between us in the UK, just talking seriously and openly about, going directly into military combat in Ukraine against the Russians. It's, it really feels like sort of like, oh, meaning, relevance, a reason to exist. Yes, please. And not pushing the analysis any further than that. And, it's unfortunate because in another world, we could be having like a very prudential discussion about how to proceed over there, if at all. But as it is, like, the folks in charge have completely erased whatever boundary between like hard-nosed political analysis and like, manipulated, managed information, wish casting, vaporware of policy. It's just impossible for an average citizen, even for like a Beltway denizen, sometimes to like make sense of what's real and what's just kind of like a pretend thing. And on that basis, you can't really do foreign policy the way that you used to. So not only are we sort of gnawing through the seed corn at home, but we're gnawing through, the fundamentals of geopolitics abroad too, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. And, I mean, here's the thing. Like, would China let us float a weather balloon across all of China and just be like, oh, yeah, we're just collecting, precipitation data or whatever? Would they withhold? Would they keep themselves from shooting it down? I'm just reminded of something. In New York City, there have now been like 20 deaths or something associated with these horrible fires when e-bike lithium batteries blow up. Okay, or like because there's all these delivery guys on bikes, these e-bikes, which were illegal until a couple years ago. But they use these cheap lithium batteries, and people will, like in NYCHA, like the housing projects will let you like pay a few dollars so you can charge them, and they're just constantly melting down and causing fires or exploding. I mean, it's becoming like it now happens all the time. Now, I seem to remember we used to have a country where you couldn't just sell anything that blows up all the time and kills people. Like they would recall it, they would ban it. You wouldn't be allowed to sell it. But we're now at the point where if a factory in China can put together some kind of plausible product, like a no name, no United Underwriters. What's that? I'm sorry. Yeah, UL, or nobody's backing it. Nobody's certifying it as safe. Just any kind of garbage. You can flood America with it, and for whatever, like as though we're like some kind of, I don't know, like as though we're like Africa. You just dump a bunch of garbage there, and we're just helpless. Like so, all the people instead of saying, okay, well, we really need to crack down on these batteries, people are just like, well, what the city needs to do is harm reduction and build kiosks where people can go and charge their batteries safely. This type of thing. So again, it's not. I don't know why we ceded control of everything to China, but it does feel that way. Sorry, that's just my little rant.
No, I mean, it is like you don't want to just dispense black pills out of your black pill, emporium or whatever, but you definitely want to articulate these challenges as they are. And I think we are ramping up into this kind of choose your fighter mode where people are going to have to pick the person they think they can bet on to represent them against these and other catastrophes. And I think articulating them as catastrophes is like important. I have no incurable optimist though I am in the long term. Like I don't see why we shouldn't just acknowledge like what a disgrace this is. Like I it
Right.
kind of boggles the mind, that we would just roll over for any country, but certainly China. And no, yeah. Sorry, Seth, did I interrupt you?
Not at all. I'm just
No.
applauding your affirmation of me.
Oh, it's the round table applauding one another's affirmation. No, I mean, like, it's actually less. How to say this? It's less about China and more about us. Like, yeah, of course, I don't, approve of Xi Jinping or the CPC, but the total lack of cultural confidence, just the kind of rollover mentality that is on display is itself demoralizing. Like maybe I'm only now realizing why we all felt so weary about the possibility of talking about the State of the Union. I presented it at the outset like it was, well, these things were always kind of political theater and they tend to be boring. But I think maybe this is closer to the depths of it, is just that to watch this doddering old man like shake his fist emptily at a crowd of kind of yutzes, and while things happen like this, while China floats balloons over our airspace, is in itself as like almost calculated to be as demoralizing as possible. And I think in some ways, like it's a form of group therapy to get together and be like, no, actually, these are the real problems. And it's, we don't have to just kind of roll over and take them. Like we can and should get mad about them. They're infuriating and they're disrespectful to just the average American citizen, like however many millions of us still care about this stuff, and this is very I think that's kind of clarifying in and of itself to understand that like the black pills are In this particular case, the black pills are like a corrective to the total reality denial that we're otherwise getting. So let's take one more black pill. So while we're at it, let's just down them. Although, as everybody knows, all black pills, in my opinion, are actually quantum pills. They're actually, they're potential energy.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
in
I
any
just want to
case,
say, I just want to say,
yeah,
Spencer, like, I on this China thing, I'm just kind of like, I mean, it's like, wake up! What the hell are we doing? I mean, why
right.
are we letting
Snap
them
out of it.
dump this like consumer electronic garbage? I mean, it's like if they were poisoning us. Anyway, so sorry.
Yep. No, so that is that. This is helping me at least to clarify my own like emotional reaction to this State of the Union. Is just snap out of it. Come on. So let's talk about this last thing, which was kind of a point of contention. So far, we've been talking about things that kind of got ignored. Now, this last issue, which was already kind of going to be a topic of one of our "This Is Fine" segments, this did become a point of heckling and contention in between Biden and congressmen, and that's the border, immigration. There's a funny little fillip here, a funny news story, in that even like NPR is having to acknowledge that Democrats are now busing immigrants, which was, if you will recall, if you're old enough to remember, this was like the evil Ron DeSantis was doing his vile transportation of immigrants as a political stunt, and Greg Abbott in Texas, and these terrible people who were sending immigrants to like Martha's Vineyard and lying to them about where they were going and telling them all these, just mistreating them dreadfully. And now this NPR story. It's too good. Busing migrants was a partisan lightning rod. Here's why Democrats have embraced it. I love that it was a partisan lightning rod. Really? For whom? Who made it a partisan lightning rod? I seem to recall NPR made it a partisan lightning rod. In any case, immigrants have always moved around. People have always traveled within the U.S. once they claim asylum at the border. And this is all papering over the fact that Arizona's Governor Katie Hobbs and some Democrat leaders in Texas are basically just having to cry uncle because there are so many people crossing the border illegally. January 13th, 2023 is the date of the latest Pew Research data that I could find on this, and I'll just read a little bit of it. The number of monthly migrant encounters had fallen to 16,182, and this is the low under Trump in 2018, I think. Or no, the second lowest total in more than 20 years in April 2020. So just after the coronavirus outbreak forced the closure of the southwestern border and slowed migration across much of the world. But if you look at their graph, it's been low sort of throughout 16 through 18. And then encounters with migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border have soared since then, with 206,239 reported in November 2022. And that's just reported, of course, according to the latest available monthly data. So to call this a crisis is a rolling crisis. I mean, this is like, when Biden talks about fentanyl deaths, he's talking about the stuff that's coming over his border. And we don't seem, so far as I can tell, to be doing anything about it, except kind of like now just at a bipartisan level, like busing people around. Maybe, Seth, I feel like I should throw to you here because I feel like this is sort of your subject. Although, I don't know, do you have something to say about this besides what we've already been saying, which is like, why do we just keep rolling over and taking this?
I mean, kind of. It's like a world historical event that's happening, really, like permitting, increasing the population of the country by, I don't know, as much as 1 or 2% annually, strictly through illegal immigration. Seems like a really radical thing to do. I wish that you could say it's just like a partisan thing, but I feel as though both sides have been historically complicit in it.
Right. Yeah.
Like
it's like they're dead in that way.
Yeah, there's this game that the Democrats say, like, well, we're willing to strengthen the border, but first we really need to address our broken immigration system. It's like, well, it's not really broken. You just don't want to enforce the laws. I mean, it's become clear that Trump, I mean, it's so interesting when you look back at Trump's campaign announcement in June of 2015, he said everything that got him elected. I want to build a wall. I want to keep out, people who we don't know who they are. And that at once sealed his victory and his ultimate defeat, because he crossed so many red lines by bringing up what is the most obvious issue to the people, the most obvious problem, and the most forbidden topic. Because look, like Bernie Sanders said, open borders are a Koch brothers issue. This is the ultimate neoliberal. People are widgets. Let's keep labor costs down. And it's also the ultimate like democratic, vision of their permanent majority going forward. And the two are walking hand in hand on this. Look, I think this is why everybody hated Trump so much. This is why they got so mad at him, because he touched this issue which everybody knew was there, but nobody wanted to pick up. And he embarrassed everybody for that, and they just really destroyed him for it, I think. Anyway, that's a little bit far afield, but yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. It's just this massive issue, and it's not going away. And this is their solution. This is what they want. This is what Biden promised he was going to do, and he did it. So now we have I don't know, another 10 or 20 million people coming in his term. They keep saying that we have that there's 11 million undocumented immigrants, but they've been saying that for 25 years. So, I mean, we've got to have I don't know, 40, 50 million, I would think. Who knows?
I think the better estimates since the gates began to open up in earnest is taking into account sort of children of illegal undocumented pushing 70 or 75 million. It's a lot of people. And what really sort of I don't know, would that it were so simple as just like picking a policy and executing it. We've had people say like, "Oh, just close the dang border." Like, okay, so there's a policy, and you can try to execute it, and it sort of never happens. So you just keep saying it, and at least I'm saying the right words. And then you got folks on the other side who are like, "Well, no, just like let them in." And okay, we did that, and now what do we do? Well, just keep letting them in. Well, but why? And then there's well, we have a moral obligation to do so. And that just opens up onto a whole new vista of strangeness. Or it's the practical argument. Well, we need people to do these jobs. We've got all these jobs, and, we're not going to have economic growth unless we flood the zone with quote unquote newcomers. Well, that is an argument from the early 90s that is still being deployed. And you know what else is being deployed?
You mean the early 1890s?
Yeah. Yes, just about. What's also being deployed is technology that is capable of taking away everyone's job. So, and look, I mean, I'm being a little bit rough with the people advocating these various ideas, but there is consternation at a pretty high level. I mean, we've got, even folks who are on the right, quote unquote, disagree on this stuff. Some are quite convinced that, look, the only way that the U.S. is going to remain competitive on the global stage is by mass importing substantially higher numbers of immigrants, and the smarter the better, because there's only so many smart people to go around the world, and there's going to be this kind of open competition for them. And if you don't cross a certain threshold, then you're basically just going to be a battery for a bot somewhere. But you have to ask, is the only way that you can win this game to not play the game? And if you opt out of thinking that, we really don't have a choice, we don't have the luxury of choosing a policy, it's being dictated to us by the unfolding of history or the pressures of technology or the fact that, China is so big, and even though India is bigger now, it's all kind of like an anti-politics. And even just sort of, imagine you can turn the tap off and everyone can take a breath. A day without illegal immigration. okay, well, now what? And it's the now what that is just looming over both sides of the kind of pantomime of the war of words that keeps playing out. Even if one side got their way once and for all, it would just open up onto much even more fundamental and hard to process questions that people are not ready to confront, that have to do with like what is the meaning of life, like what is the point, why should we keep this a going concern. I think a lot of Americans are very reluctant, to say the least, on a deep, profound level, to support policies for no other reason than, well, we don't have a choice. How do we get back to having a choice again? How do we get back to the possibility of a politics where you're sort of thinking through, like, okay, well, here are the people who make up the polity. And I mean, this is like, almost going back to Schoolhouse Rock levels of analysis, but fundamental stuff. And it's being swept away under the banner of like, well, we don't have a choice. It's a crisis. It's it's history, it's technology, where it's not for us to decide. We don't have the luxury of freedom, of deliberation, of a polity, and that's just a very, it's a very inhuman position to be in when, all of these basic human faculties that have been used since as far back as the historical record goes to order societies, to order peoples in a productive and generative way. If all those things are being cast aside because we don't have the luxury of doing that anymore, then things that sound crazy start to sound less crazy. Like when, Vladimir Putin or whoever says like, well, why wouldn't we just blow up the world with our nuclear weapons? If there isn't going to be a Russia in this world, then why even care? That sounds like the ravings of a madman. And then you sort of look at what's going on in America and you're like, well, gosh, like if we can't really have America anymore and we can't really be Americans anymore and we don't even have the luxury of politics, and like what you just, so why try at all? That is a sentiment that is not going to go away. I think it's getting stronger. And the first credible and competent politician past the post who can tap into that energy and address it by presenting an agenda to actually recover and reclaim politics, American style, in the classic and enduring sense of, thoughtfully making fundamental decisions about how to keep the polity healthy, they're going to be rewarded. And if that doesn't happen, then there's going to be more pain.
Well, I'm into that. I mean, this is that it's important to note, and I'll just emphasize that, like the rhetorical gesture that says, I'm sorry, we ran the numbers and actually Republican government, it's just not feasible. It's not workable anymore under digital conditions or because of all the immigration or whatever. That rhetorical gesture is like a hallmark of progressivism. It's almost the fundamental gesture of like capital P progressivism. And anytime you hear it, you should call BS, because it's the clock has never run out on Republican government as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, the floor is open for somebody that can take these issues squarely in hand. Having said that, let's move on to our new regular segment, Read the Damn Site, where we each share a piece from the site that we liked best this week, or if not best, then a lot. And I'll go first. Mine is a piece called Post-Pandemic Blues. It's by a writer named John Paul Hampstead, who has written a few pieces for us before. He is a strategic analyst for FreightWaves, which is this provider of global supply chain market intelligence. That's how they describe themselves. But really, I mean, just a really skilled writer is JP, and he combines punchy prose with actually having the goods. He knows his subject down to the ground. He gives you interesting and actionable information in many cases. In this piece especially, I thought he knocked it out of the park. It's about what's happened to the supply chains after COVID, that being kind of injected with all of this emergency money and attention didn't leave our supply chains and our transit industry in a more powerful position, surprise, surprise, but actually kind of deformed and warped it so that now, as the pandemic recedes, we're left with all sorts of problems that arise when you panic and throw money at a problem in all sorts of undisciplined and probably unhelpful ways. So go check out the piece. It's called Post-Pandemic Blues by a writer that you would do well also to pay attention to, named John Paul Hampstead.
I will cast my lot today for Maloney Ascends by Benjamin Braddock. Speaking of gasp politics, this is a nice little piece about how the new PM of Italy has gone from a fascist exclamation number one, to something different, to a lady who wears designer clothing, and she's kind of, the Borg has, at least for now, kind of reconciled itself to the idea that it's maybe a stupid idea to try to demonize this spirited lady. But it really takes a look at how, what she's done in office so far has not only not been fascism, of course, but has been thoughtful and nuanced and calibrated to the to the actual needs of the Italian people. What a crazy idea! It's a nice piece from a guy who's a senior editor at IM 1776, our friends over there. And it's a nice reminder that, I think we hear a lot about Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin and Erdogan in Turkey, and the media is just hell-bent on convincing us that, today Istanbul, tomorrow your hometown will fall under the sway of autocrats. And in fact, that is a caricature of the scene in Europe. And Maloney's time in office so far is an indication that maybe politics is not quite dead yet in what oftentimes seems to be a post-political hellscape over there in Europe, at least in the West. So stay tuned to that. And if you're looking for signs of life that maybe Americans can learn from without having to stretch our imaginations too far, like, let's face it, we're a large republic, and that means we can't take too many cues from Europe. But in this case, food for thought. So Maloney Ascends.
I'm holding myself back from singing I Am Not Dead Yet from the Monty Python musical Spam-A-Lot, but I will just note, James, that you forgot, in addition to the one followed by an exclamation point, you forgot the camel case, which must always go along with cries of fascism of this kind. That's, for those who don't know, that's the font where you put some letters randomly in capital and some in lowercase, so that it looks like you've got like kind of buck teeth and you are doing the SpongeBob meme. So camel case font for
the humps of a camel.
Fascist. That's exactly.
Got it.
Oh,
exactly.
So that's
the more you know.
That's what you call that. I would say I enjoyed this piece called Democratic Injustice by our friend Katja Sedgwick, who writes from San Francisco. She had a clever take on the San Francisco's proposal for reparations. And she's like, well, I mean, if we're going to provide reparations to African Americans, like, well, California was never a slave state. We should look, and, most of the people who would be affected, whatever, long dead. We should look more recently at a crime against Black San Franciscans, which was Jim Jones and what happened at Jonestown. And, she gets into the whole sort of intentionally forgotten story of Jim Jones's deep, deep involvement in the San Francisco Democratic political structure and his close ties to secular St. Harvey Milk, Kamala Harris's patron Willie Brown, George Moscone, the murdered mayor of San Francisco, Rosalind Carter. It goes on and on. I mean, Jim Jones was the housing commissioner of San Francisco before he became the greatest mass murderer in American history. So it's a funny piece, Democratic Injustice by Katja Sedgwick. It's worth a read.
Awesome. Well, with that, go read the damn site, since we're calling this segment that in absence of a better name. And I just want to correct myself in real time, although I think it's less of a correction than a shade of nuance. Camel case is where the words are blended together, but the capitals do indicate the start of a new word. So strictly speaking, what I'm talking about is mixed case, which is the super bumpy one. Although it seems like there's some confusion about these naming conventions online at a glance. In any case, I will close us out just by reading that Bill Kristol tweet. It was indeed Kristol who said, if the balloon had anti-Black history messages stenciled on it, or if it were dropping anti-trans pamphlets down to earth. I never thought I'd see Bill Kristol. Well, I never, growing up, I wouldn't have thought I would see Bill Kristol using the phrase anti-trans as a pejorative. Anti-trans pamphlets down to earth, or if we're broadcasting denunciations of wokeness nonstop, MAGA would be pro-balloon. They'd be welcoming the balloon. They'd be worshiping the balloon. And if you really want a black pill, you should know that that tweet is not, in fact, ratioed. It's got a lot of absurd responses and people rolling their eyes, but it's 27,000 likes to 14,000 responses. So unfortunately, I have to leave you with that sad news about the state of the American electorate and their discernment and taste when it comes to tweets. But you, dear listeners, have no lack of discernment and taste because you've been listening to us. And for that, we'd like to thank you. Thank you for listening once again to the Roundtable. If you'd like to learn more about our various projects, you can visit our websites at Claremont, reviewofbooks.com, americanmind.org, claremont.org, and you can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate. Plus, don't forget about our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life, dc.claremont.org. There are all sorts of ways that you can help support this show, but first and foremost, you can spread the word. Let people know, tweet about it if you're on Twitter, tell your friends, rate, review, share, subscribe, give us 5 stars, please, or at the very least, keep your bad opinions to yourself. Thank you again to our production crew, Logan Zeppieri and Jake Gannon, and thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week.